Yeah, we've been doing this since March 2005. I'm sort of sorry to say, as you mentioned in the intro, I spotted some things about the student loan program that led me to conclude that something was horribly awry with certainly the federal student loan system, but student loans in general. So I started doing research, and within about a year or so, I wound up being featured top story on 60 Minutes with what I had found. And so, quite frankly, I was kind of hoping that this would only be a 2-year project. But unfortunately, here we are 16 very long years later. And thankfully, we're finally getting places. But, I don't think I ever understood just how powerful the two parties in power are when they decide that they don't want to solve a problem. So thank you for having me. Thanks to the Virginia Green Party. Thanks, Blazin, for your help here. And so maybe I'll go back to the beginning of the founding of this country. Yes, sir.
Before you begin, I'd just like to say for those in attendance that if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead. You can either put in chat or put stack in if you'd like to ask it yourself. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation. So please ask. I will be calling on you or reading out your question. Alan is more than excited to answer them. And at the end, we will have a Q&A session if you'd like to wait till then. So Alan, you can take away now.
And also, if you have any stories, student loan debt stories, if you don't have questions, even if you have stories, at the end, we'd like to hear them. Okay, thank you, Alan. Alan's got a slideshow presentation that we'll start with now, and take it away, Alan.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you very much. And yeah, any questions that people might have, comments, just throw them out. Happy to respond in stream as we go along. So maybe I wanted to start with a couple of quotes I thought are pretty interesting. Thomas Jefferson, sort of the forefather of the state of Virginia, he at one point said that, banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. John Adams, you can see his quote, 2 ways to conquer and enslave a country, one by the sword, the other by debt. Well, unfortunately, we are living through the warnings of these men. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, they were being savaged brutally under debt to British banks and merchants. Robert Morris, another founder, he actually spent time in debtor's prison. Thomas Jefferson narrowly avoided debtor's prison. And a lot of people don't realize that probably the majority of people who came to the New World were escaping debt from the old world. The state of Georgia, for example, and I'll come back to this, the state of Georgia was originally set up as a refuge for imprisoned debtors. So the problems of debt have been with this country for a long time. The most important upshot of all of this is the fact that the founders, when they wrote the Constitution, they called for uniform bankruptcy laws in the Constitution, not the Bill of Rights, the Constitution itself. They called for it ahead of the power to declare war, ahead of the power to raise an army, ahead of the power to coin currency. So here we are 250 years later, and student loans are the only type of loan in this country that has been uniquely stripped of the same uniform bankruptcy rights that every other borrower in this country enjoys with every other type of loan. Next slide. So this problem really began in the 70s, but it really started taking off after 1998, when there were some key changes in federal legislation that made bankruptcy protections permanently unavailable for federal student loans. And then again in 2005, I should say, this was even accelerated more by the removal of bankruptcy protections from private student loans. So there was never a basis for removing bankruptcy protections. The excuse back in the day was that, all these students are flocking from graduation and they're expunging their loans in bankruptcy. We can't have this. We've got to get rid of bankruptcy protections. Well, we now know, with the benefit of hindsight, that back when bankruptcy was the same for student loans as all other loans, far less than 1%, like a third of 1%, were ultimately discharged in bankruptcy. So there was never a rational basis for removing this right. But here we can see, it really started rolling about 1998. In the year 2000, we owed maybe 150 or so billion dollars in student loan debt. Today, we owe about 1.8 trillion. In fact, it's probably a lot higher than that. But there's a lot of debt that's not traceable. But this is just one of the stunning statistics I could throw your way. Student loans versus credit cards. You can see in 2000, it was roughly maybe 17 or so percent. Well, student loan debt has not only surpassed credit cards, it has dwarfed credit cards. And in fact, it's not just credit cards that we're looking at here, guys. This is all revolving consumer debt. So these are home equity lines of credit, other lines of credit, other lending vehicles that are out there. So, I mean, I think that says a lot. Next slide. Some of the more interesting facts, the default rate for 2004 students was 40%, and they were only borrowing about a third of what students are borrowing today for college. In fact, just a few minutes ago, I spoke to Wayne Johnson, who ran the federal lending system under President Trump, a Republican, believe it or not. And he told me even before the pandemic that 80% of all federal student loan borrowers were underwater. So in other words, they were either unable to pay or they were paying, but their balances were going up. And the vast majority of those were unable to pay anything. I also wanted to point out that African Americans are hurt so bad, so much worse by student loan debt. It's almost hard to even put in perspective anymore. I know that maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the default rate for African American borrowers was like 4, if not 5 times higher than average. Now, the problem with that statistic today is that the average is probably 40, 50%, and it's going to be much, much higher in the next few years for all current borrowers. So it's literally impossible for the African-American default rate to be 5 times higher at this point. But if I had to take a guess, I would say that something like 85 or 90% of African-American student loan borrowers wind up in default. And guys, just turn on your TV for 10 minutes and look at all the for-profit colleges that you see advertising. These are horrible schools. I mean, maybe some people got some benefit out of them, but like even before 2008, the default rate for these colleges was like 70%. Today, I'm sure it's 80, 85, 90. It's just ridiculous. These schools spend more on advertising than they do on teaching and learning. So these are just terrible schools. They're not doing much, if anything, for their students who more and more they are marketing to African Americans, in particular single women African Americans. That seems to be their market focus. And I mean, just how terrible is that? Come on. I worked in civil rights for quite a few years before starting student loan justice. And while I certainly don't have firsthand experience, I can tell you that certainly it's pretty hard to be bankable, to be even functional as an African American because of all the disadvantages that are sort of built into the fabric. And so I just wanted to highlight that. I think it's an important thing. And quite frankly, Obama, we were expecting more from, but I can talk about that later. I might also add, the government is not only booking $50 billion a year in profit on this lending system, they're even making a profit on defaulted student loans. Now, that is a very important fact. It's almost never reported. A credit card company is thrilled to get back 10 cents on the dollar on a default. The Department of Education makes back between $1.10 and $1.22 on the dollar. So that's something that no other lending industry can brag about. Hopefully most of you have been hearing lately about how 99% of the people who are trying for for loan forgiveness through the existing programs, public service, income-based repayment, et cetera, 99% are being disqualified. So the Department of Education has no desire or intentions of canceling any loans. This is not a bad borrower problem. This is a bad lending system. And more to the point, this is a bad governmental run lending system. Sorry to say that. I'm sure the Department of Agriculture and Commerce and Defense, all the other federal agencies do a great job. Well, the Department of Education, Office of Federal Student Aid, has abandoned all pretense of fighting for the people. They are fighting for themselves now, and people should be very concerned and alarmed. The last point I'll make on interesting facts, and this again, well, maybe two more points. We learned recently that over a third of US states, Virginia included, the people in those states owe more than their entire total state budget in student loan debt, which is just astonishing. And it turns out that a lot of red states, southern states like Georgia, North South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, Indiana, Florida is terrible. They tend to be the worst. And so I think I'll just leave it there at that, but I'll maybe come back to this later. Next slide.
So Tina has a question. I'm going to call in Tina.
Sure.
I just had a comment too, Alan, with you talking about the for-profit colleges. I taught in a technical school LPN program for a while, and those students, and like you said, a lot of those LPN students were female, and they're juggling jobs, children, and school and everything, and it's outrageous what they're having to try to do as adult learners. And of course they get some help through the through the loans and all of that, but they end up with tremendous debt. So many of them cannot make it through because of all the other pressures that they're under. And I just wanted to draw attention that so many of the people that are under these student debts, I mean, nobody wants to try to go to school and then have to quit. I mean, I just don't think they do. And so many people don't make it through to a degree and they still have all this debt.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Tina. One commercial rings true in my head as we're talking about this. I can't remember the college, but the gist of the commercial was, hey, you're an African-American female single mother. You're working 2 jobs to make ends meet. You need to go to college. And I'm just like, wait a minute. She's trying to raise kids on her own. She's working 2 jobs. Oh, and now she should go to college 5-10 hours a week. Like, are you kidding me? The dropout rate among all colleges is 40%. Among the for-profit colleges, it's far higher than that. It's probably 60, if not 70%. So this is just setting people up for a fail more often than not, generally, but for African Americans in particular. It's just so rough.
And of course, the Green Party says that higher education should be tuition free. So all of this, the debt and the just having to pay for the benefit of society for having an education and then ending up in student loan prison like it really is certainly against our platform.
You're exactly right. So many other countries on this planet educate their citizens for free. And I can mention some, I'd say, second world countries, Cuba and Venezuela and Russia. Well, I guess Russia's first world, but on and on and on. The fact that we here in this country, supposedly the strongest country on earth, can't seem to educate our citizens without wrecking their lives in the vast majority of cases in debt is just beyond me. So we're in uncharted territory now, guys. The default rate for subprime home mortgages was 18%. That's less than 20%. And by my best estimate of everybody walking around with student loans right now, we are going to see a default rate of something like 80, maybe 85%. So that's 4 times higher than the subprime home mortgage default rate. Even before this pandemic, around 65% of everybody was not able to make payments on their loans. So what is it going to be after this repayment suspension is lifted? Is it going to be 75%? Probably. Is it going to be 80%? Maybe. I don't know what more evidence you need to see to conclude along with me that this is a catastrophically failed lending system. Next slide. You know, for the first 16 years of our existence, we argued very moderately for the return of bankruptcy protections. But I have to tell you, I think it's too late. I think at this point, returning bankruptcy to student loans would probably only ensure the bankruptcies of 15, 20, 25 million people. This would overwhelm the bankruptcy courts in this country to the point of seizure. They would seize up. So and another point, we can look at the people affected, and there's probably 5 other categories that we could maybe shoehorn this issue into, but it's very interesting. I mentioned how African Americans are being hurt badly, but you know, women, females hold 2/3 of all student loan debt. And you know, our opposition, the sort of student loan swamp, they love to say, oh, these college kids, they were drinking too much beer at spring break and blah, 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 blah. Well, the reality is that there are more, this is a seniors issue. More people over the age of 50 than under the age of 25 with student loan debt. That's another point of research that we're trying to break in the media now. But so far, only the Chronicle of Higher Education has referenced our research. But I'm telling you, it's true. And the truth about this is coming out. So people need to really rethink everything they think they know about student loan debt. I also mentioned earlier that most of the states that are just completely screwed in comparison to their state budgets are red states. I think I already added that 40% of all people who go to college don't graduate. To that, I would add maybe one last category, and that is veterans. I don't have any hard data to provide to you here right now, but anecdotally, we have a ton of veterans in our group who maybe they went off on deployment and their significant other was handling their finances. I don't know why, but people in uniform are being hurt a lot worse than average. I could maybe throw in like veterinarians for some reason and like chiropractors, believe it or not. Also people who went to art institutes and so forth. But there's a lot of ways to slice this and dice this. But the lending system is catastrophically failed for just about everybody, like 80-85% of everyone. So you can look at this in many different ways. Next slide. And here's just the research that I told you about earlier. This is the list of the 18 states that owe more than their state budgets. You can see Georgia is terrible. It's eye-popping. But, you know, Florida is not far behind, Missouri. And, you know, none of this, the fact that even one U.S. state, the people of those states owe more in student loan debt than their entire state budget, that right there is newsworthy. So here you can see the list and you can see for yourself that these are historically pretty conservative states by and large. Now, I don't know what Virginia, what you guys consider Virginia to be, but I suspect Virginia probably has a little higher state budget per capita than some of the other states we see listed here. And so the fact that even with their high per capita state spending, the fact that Virginia is on this list, where are they?
Near the bottom.
Well, yeah,
okay,
well,
I can't see it. It's like 102%. It's just below my division, but yeah, the fact that Virginia is even on this list is pretty interesting to me.
Yeah. So Alan, Tina has a question or a comment.
Okay. You may be about to say it, Alan, but a lot of times people don't know why that matters. That student loans are greater than the state budget, but you know, you've explained it before in some of the talks that you've given, that it's the velocity of money that people can't buy cars, can't buy homes, all the money that should be staying in the state and contributing to the state economy is going into the pockets of these banks.
That's exactly right. And even Virginia, I don't see the number. I can't see the numbers in front of my face.
It's 103%. Yeah.
So the interest you can times all of those student debt numbers by about 6%, and that is how much interest is flowing out of the state and accruing to the books of the Department of Education by and large, or maybe some banks in Manhattan. But the federal government owns about 87% of this debt. So most of this money is leaving the state, going right back to Washington, D.C. And you can see for states like Texas, I mean, we're talking a huge amount of money. We're talking $8 billion, maybe even more, that's leaving the state. Like the state of Georgia, here's another interesting metric. There's enough student loan debt in the state of Georgia to buy every farm in the state of Georgia twice and still have $20 billion left over. So peaches and peanuts and everything that grows in Georgia, you could buy every farm, every tractor, every barn, every piece of equipment twice over and still have $20 billion left. So I guess there's different things you can compare it to. I like comparing it to state budgets because that's something that state legislatures and governors can really get there. They can really relate to that. They really understand the state budget. They know it's a lot of money. And quite frankly, I would bet that not even 3 governors on this whole list that we're looking at here even know how much money their people, their citizens, owe in student loan debt. They just don't. These are federal loans, and governors only care about state stuff, and similarly with legislators. So next slide. Just another graphic. These are the states that are that owe more than their state budget in student loan debt. And I think the trend is pretty clear. But almost none of the states are good, so maybe I shouldn't even have green. Like maybe only like Hawaii and Alaska, which are like 30%, are sort of within, I would consider, sort of stable levels. Next slide. So I have to say, folks, and this is a reason why conservatives should be listening to us. This is a big government problem. It truly is. The federal government runs 87% of these loans. Wall Street is bad. There's no doubt. There's no bankruptcy protections for private student loans either. But the federal government is the queen bee that sits atop the hornet's nest. And I am so sorry to report that the Department of Education, not so much the secretary, although they haven't been great lately, but it's really more the unelected, unappointed bureaucrats that are very hard to fire, and they've got their hooks in. And it's really the unelected people that have abandoned all pretense of looking out for the borrowers. They're looking out for their own institutional interests only. You know, they fight tooth and nail behind the scenes to keep bankruptcy gone from the loans. And, as I said, they are finding a way to reject 99% of the people out of the various forgiveness programs. I could go on and on. I could write a book about it. Well, I actually did. But anyways, Department of Education is terrible. This is a big government problem. Conservatives everywhere should be very concerned. Next slide. Oh, this is just a little tip of the hat to our Constitution, where I said the call for uniform bankruptcy laws is listed ahead of the power to declare war, ahead of the power to raise an army, ahead of the power to coin currency, create a judiciary. So the founders knew something, and this weaponized student loan system is precisely what they wanted to avoid when they wrote the Constitution. And I should probably add, in the Bill of Rights, we are guaranteed equal protection under the law. Well, student loan borrowers certainly are not given equal protection, certainly in federal bankruptcy court under the law. I should maybe say here that bankruptcy is not a fun thing. It's not a sexy topic. It's not something that everybody really wants to rush out into the street and, hey, I want my bankruptcy protections back. It's not that. But the founding fathers knew something, and this whole problem really does hinge on the absence of bankruptcy. Next slide. So what needs to happen? As I said, for the first 16 years, we fought very moderately for the return of bankruptcy protections, and that does have to happen because, as I said, the federal government owns 87% of all student loans, but there are still 13% of non-federally owned loans, and then also a good percentage that are guaranteed by the government but owned by private companies. We've got to have bankruptcy protections returned to all student loans. And in fact, it is a necessary precondition for any sort of good faith government action on this. Because, as I said, the Department of Education, no matter what law you might pass, the Department of Education will find a way to not do it. With one exception, and this is the second point, or actually the first point, the president has all the power needed, president and the secretary, to cancel every penny of federally owned student loan debts. That's 87% of all student debt. Joe Biden could do this tomorrow with the stroke of his pen. The government already paid for these loans many years ago. They didn't pay much, by the way. They didn't pay $1.6 trillion. These loans could be canceled tomorrow without needing one dime from Congress. So without any congressional approval, without any congressional appropriation, in other words, not one penny would have to be taken from the Treasury. And this would add nothing, zero, to the national debt. So in this time of pandemic, we're throwing trillions out to the country, much of it in the form of PPP loans that don't need to be repaid. There is no easier, cheaper, quicker way to massively stimulate the economy than by canceling these loans. So we started a petition about a year ago in March calling for exactly that. The petition gained a lot of steam. And by the way, we researched the law very carefully. And we would not have started the petition if we were not supremely confident that the president can do this. So we started a petition calling for this. The petition got very big. We just crossed 1 million signatures last week. And lo and behold, right as we started really going viral and getting reported nationally, Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer they embraced the concept, and they are now, and other Democrats in Congress are now calling, for exactly what we started calling for way back in March. So we are thrilled to see leading lawmakers embrace this concept. But at the same time, I'm very worried because we have found that it's sort of a good cop, bad cop thing in Washington, D.C. The Republicans are the bad cops. They proudly wear that hat. They hate student loan borrowers. The Democrats pretend that they care, but at the end of the day, back when we had a super majority just before Obama took office in 2007, the Blue Dog Democrats defeated legislation that would have returned bankruptcy protections to student loans. So too here today, we are seeing people like Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, they're calling for loan cancellation, but they're putting all these weird qualifiers on it, like up to $10,000, up to $50,000. Well, that could mean anything. And at the end of the day, our opposition, which largely is the Department of Education and the for-profit crony capitalist contractors that swim in and around there, they would love to do a phony loan cancellation, which sounds good, but nobody actually really gets it, as long as they can keep bankruptcy protections gone from the loans. So that's kind of the inside baseball. And again, we're thrilled to hear people like Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer telling the president to cancel student loans by executive order. But I'm very concerned that what we're going to see is sort of a bait and switch, where they'll go, look, we canceled loans, and oh yeah, we forgot again to return bankruptcy protections. This is exactly the wrong thing. This is the most dangerous thing possible. This lending system is weaponized. It is a national threat. Almost nobody is paying on their loans right now. And when this pandemic abates, very few people are going to be able to resume paying. Now, I don't think we deserve to be conquered and enslaved, and that is precisely what's happening. And I can only hope that people are starting to open their eyes to that. Next slide. So we've done a whole bunch of stuff over the years. I just want to point out that protest is important. People need to get off their couches and not be afraid to mix it up and speak their mind. And don't be cowed and intimidated by the student loan swamp people out there who would use our goodwill and our good faith against us. They wag their fingers and they go, oh, you shouldn't have borrowed so much. And, oh, you should have known better. No, 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 no. This issue, the principle of personal responsibility, has been used as a camouflage for the most heinous, unconstitutionally vicious, predatory lending behavior that we have ever seen in modern day America. Don't allow yourself to be cowed and intimidated. Help us fight and don't be ashamed of it. This is a very noble and patriotic cause that we're engaged in here. We may have to go to Boston Harbor and burn our student loans and throw the ashes in the drink or something like that. It may come down to that because the people that are running the student loan swamp, they are not going to go down without a fight, and they will never give up. And I can't speak for their morals. I don't know where they are, their souls, none of that. But I can tell you that it's going to be a tough battle. Which is kind of ridiculous given that we just threw trillions of dollars out in the form of these PPP loans that don't need to be repaid. But for some reason, they like to single out students. But I'm here to tell you that we don't have to take it. We don't have to put up with this nonsense. The founding fathers are on our side, not the bad guys' side. And at some point, the Republicans are going to come around to agreeing with us. I am confident. I'm very confident. Maybe not supremely confident because I've seen the Republicans do some dirty things over the years, but I just want to let everybody know that it's not just, you don't have to suffer in silence. You don't have to think it's your fault. You don't have to think you're alone. This is the worst big government lending scam in modern day America. And quite frankly, I think the most unwise, unpatriotic thing that anybody can do going forward is to ever pay another dime into this federal loan system. I'm sorry, that's just feeding the beast. It's not good for you. It's not good for the country. And it's not good for the tens or hundreds of millions of people who are going to follow in our footsteps. Next slide. So that's basically it. I'm sorry if I went longer, but if you have any questions or comments.
Yeah, so before we get yeah, so this is the question answering phase. If you have personal stories you'd like to share, you can go ahead and do that. Just put stack in the chat or type it in and I'll read it aloud. We'll go in order of how they're posted. First, Diana shared her story while you were presenting a little while ago. And so I just like to read that out. So, you know, she was thanking Tina and thanking you for, you know, being a champion for student loan justice, but that after a decade, they're still working, or they're still paying, and they for their social work degree that they only got $30K in Pennsylvania, as well as a big therapy bill. So he left the field from, you know, helping families and children to working an administrative job.
That's a very common refrain. You know, this debt forces people to do things that they don't like to do. You know, people wanted to go into public service, wanted to do very sort of maybe not financially hugely paying endeavors, but very publicly important. And they are prevented from doing that because of dollars and the cents. And it's just terrible. Public service loan forgiveness program was supposed to solve that problem. Well, here now we know that less than 2% of the people trying for public service are actually getting it because the Department of Education has, as I said, no desire or intentions of canceling these loans. So it's just the worst thing of all worlds, particularly for people who go into public service.
All right, now next is Tina, she's on stack.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I know that student loan justice is nonpartisan, but you're nonpartisan in a single issue. Basically, anybody that will get behind forgiving student loans, you back them, right? That's basically the way it goes. And To my understanding, the only presidential nominees that you've been able to back were Jill Stein and Howie Hawkins with the Green Party, because nobody else is standing up for the student loan borrowers and willing to forgive student debt. Of course, the Green Party would do that because we know that that's a great economic stimulus. It's justice, and that education actually is a public good and pays back the public. And I just wanted to draw attention that there's 45,000 people in student loan debt. Is that right, Alan?
45 million.
45 million. So when you've got 1 million signatures on your petition, we need 45. We need 45 million. And if people, I know you're nonpartisan, but we're not. And if 45 million people that wanted their student loans forgiven got behind the Green Party, joined, ran and funded the Green Party and voted Green, we would win by plurality with just the 45 million in student loan debt. We would win the presidency with that. And you can guarantee that a Green president would, by executive order, forgive those student loans right away. That's my plug.
You know, I'm sorry that I didn't mention that earlier. You know, it's very rare that we will even endorse a candidate. We've got a pretty high bar. But the Green Party, Jill and Howie, they were way ahead of the curve on this. I think Jill was calling for student loan cancellation as far back as 2012. And lo and behold, here we are 8 years later. And I will say, to date, the only presidential major party nominees that we have ever endorsed are Jill and Howie. We couldn't endorse Biden. We could endorse Obama. We couldn't endorse Hillary Clinton. So yeah, this is an issue that really, I think, showcases how far ahead of the curve the Green Party is. And again, we're nonpartisan, but I got to tell you guys, the Democrats and the Republicans, at what point are you going to realize what's going on here? And I don't think it's just student loans. There's many issues out there, particularly a lot of economic financial issues that cost a lot of corporations and rich people money potentially, where all of a sudden they get lost in this political divide. They just get swept under the rug or between the cracks of the DER divide, and that's not a random thing. There's a reason for that. And so, you know, at what point are you going to say, screw it, I'm going to vote my conscience rather than one party or the other? I think these parties I truly think these parties are done. So.
It's me again.
Team is on stack again.
When you talk about the bankruptcy laws being removed from student loans and student loans being the only debt that is not allowed to be removed by bankruptcy, would you please speak to Joe Biden's part in that?
Oh, I'd be thrilled to. Joe Biden, 27-year representative, congressman, senator from Delaware, where a lot of very terrible lending institutions are headquartered. The private banks were able to convince Joe Biden and Congress to remove bankruptcy protections from private student loans in 2005. So that's like taking bankruptcy protections away from, you know, credit cards or medical debt, or God forbid, corporate debt. Like, the world would explode if they ever did that. But they saw a vulnerable target with students, and along with John Boehner, Buck McKeon, other key Republicans, Mike Enzi in Congress, Joe Biden railroaded that legislation right on through, and he's got a bad history on. It's not just the Bankruptcy Act of 2005. You know, I could go on and on. He plays golf, I hear, at Albert Lord's private luxury golf course in Anne Arundel, Maryland. golf junkets, Boca Raton, other places paid for by Sallie Mae, on and on and on. Sallie Mae relocated their corporate headquarters to Delaware after the 2005 bankruptcy bill went through. It was a few years later, but just watching Joe Biden and Albert Lord give a literally shoulder-to-shoulder interview on that, you could tell that these guys were old pals. And so Biden was honestly the worst candidate in the field for both the major parties. We probably would have endorsed Elizabeth Warren or Bernie, but I don't know what happened. I'm frankly a little suspicious, but Joe Biden all of a sudden went from nothing to everything in the course of one state, South Carolina. I don't know how that happened, but we're stuck with him. And I will say this to give some people out there hope. Joe Biden shut me down eyeball to eyeball in Iowa last year on the bankruptcy question. So at that point, we had just started the petition. I wasn't even going to mention loan cancellation, but he basically laughed me out of the room on just talking about bankruptcy. And that was a year ago. Well, here we are a year later. And at least before the election, Joe Biden was like, yeah, bankruptcy, bankruptcy, bankruptcy. And he was like, yeah, and I'm endorsing Elizabeth Warren's bankruptcy plan. And yeah, if you earn less than $125,000 a year, I'm going to eliminate your student loan debt, is what he said. So Joe Biden's a politician. He goes where the wind blows. We need to be the hurricane. We should have 45 million people on our side. Right now, we've got not quite 2% of all student loan borrowers. So Tina was nice enough to inform me yesterday that with 3.5%, that's pretty much enough to start a revolution. Maybe Tina can speak more to that than I can, but we're halfway there. I would love to have 10, 15, 20 million people on that petition. Frankly, I'd love to have 30 or 40 million people on. I think if everybody with student loans knew about the petition and knew about the Green Party, quite frankly, I think a very significant percentage of them would sign the petition, probably 75%. And who knows, they could really make the Green Party what it wants to be. And I would love to see that. I think it's time to get rid of this two-party duopoly. It's just so painful.
Well, that is the platform of the Green Party. We are not trying to become one of the two parties. The whole system's got to go. We need proportional representation and a whole bunch of other great things that are in the Green Party platform, which means we're not trying to silence people. We're trying to give more people choices and representation. That's what proportional representation is, not a duopoly system. We certainly do not fit into the Democrat or Republican Party, and we're the only national corporate-free party, the only one. There's no one else in the top 4 or 5 national parties that is corporate-free, only the Green Party. So you're going to get what people pay for, and corporations are not people in the Green Party. So I did want to encourage anyone that if they have a story, feel free to share it. If you have a question, we'd love to hear from you. Also, while we're waiting, you mentioned the 3.5% rule. If anyone does not know about that, the 3.5% rule of revolution, with nonviolence being twice as successful in revolutionary change than violence. So the Green Party is about peace and nonviolence as key values and pillars. It only takes, in the United States, 3.5% is about 11 million people to stop propping up the system that's in power. You can't change it from the inside. This is history. This is revolutionary history. You cannot change it from the inside. So we have to have political disobedience, and we have to have peaceful civil disobedience and say no. And there's plenty of, once the trick about the 3.5% rule is once the military and the police will not cooperate with the system anymore, then it falls very quickly. So we need to be reaching those people in the military and police that are under student loan debt as well. There's plenty of them out there, and people that have children that they want to go to college that cannot because of the cost. So this affects all of us. This affects all of us, and it makes it's a drag on the economy of the United States. So it benefits everyone to cancel these student loan debts, because even though some of the interest would not be paid back, the gain of setting people free and the velocity of money in the economy would far outweigh that. And the Green Party also believes in not issuing money as debt, which is the system we have now, and issuing money as greenbacks and spending money into the economy for the things that are public, that help the public, and that are a boon to the economy. So we need those 45,000 people in student loan debt to stand up and say, if Joe Biden doesn't forgive this debt within the first, how many days has he been in there? Within the first 100 days, we need to say we're getting out of this two-party criminal sham, and we're going to the Green Party, and we're going to end these student loan debts.
Yeah, Joe Biden's got about 3 days or so, 3 or 4 days before the 100 days is up. So it's not looking good.
No, it's not. Alan, do you have a Virginia chapter of student loan justice?
We do have a Virginia chapter, and people can find it at our website, studentloanjustice.org. The more the merrier. We're a very loose organization. We're 100% grassroots. We're a lot like the Green Party, actually, but we only care about student loans. That's our one niche. So whatever your political leanings are, you're very welcome in our little group. And we love seeing local actions. I would love to do something with the governor there, like show up on his porch. I don't know. Obviously nonviolent. I would love to do something to compel the governor to get his arms around this problem and tackle it head on. Stand up to the federal government, stand up to the banks on behalf of his people, the voters, by the way, who probably put him into office.
Yes.
I'm seeing some chat comments pop up there. I can't read them though.
Yes. So Kevin said that they got married a few years ago, that they're an RN, and so is their wife. They asked, is it fair to say that they would need to get a divorce to qualify to get their student loans forgiven because they think they might be over a cap?
No, there's no cap. The president can cancel 100% of all student loans that are owned directly by the federal government. So if you have, if you took out loans after 2010, and they are federal loans, almost certainly your loans would qualify. But you want to call your servicer and just make sure that your loans are owned directly by the federal government. There are a lot of older style loans, so-called FFELP loans. Also, Perkins loans are a sort of hybrid case, but those loans are not owned directly by the federal government. So the president cannot cancel those loans by executive order. So you'd want to call if you have so-called direct loans, then you're fine. But you want to call your servicer because it's pretty ambiguous. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes.
But they said it was before 2010.
Yeah, so it could be either way, Kevin. Chances are you probably have the older style FFELP loans. Now, what I recommend if you have the older style loans, there's two things you can do. And this is assuming the president is going to cancel the loans, but the only way the president can cancel the loans is if they are owned by the federal government. So if you have the older style loans that are not owned by the federal government, you can either consolidate those loans into the direct federal program. And if you just Google that and then go to the first link,
they're all consolidated.
That's okay. You can consolidate already consolidated FFELP loans into the direct loan program in most cases. So you can do that, and hopefully that would work. But you want to check it out for yourself. There are some fees involved, etc. I don't give advice, but so that's the one way that you can turn your FFELP loans into direct loans. There's another way. Which is actually what I did, believe it or not. My loans went into default, And I realized that something horribly awry was going on. I was like, you know what? Send my loans. I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk directly to the horse's mouth. Send my loans to the Department of Education directly. And that is what they did. And so now my loans are owned by the federal government. So yeah, there's two ways. One is kind of maybe a little more risky in defaulting. But I would certainly recommend looking into that, because nobody wants to be stuck with certainly federally guaranteed loans when all the other federal loans are being canceled.
So Patricia says they worked for 30 years, and in the beginning their loans were passed around from lender to lender. Now they're not working and they're retired, so they cannot get I cannot get a forgiveness even though I worked in Title I. I said, can she get forgiveness even though they worked in Title I schools the entire time?
No, there's so many forgiveness programs out there. There's federal forgiveness programs where 99% of the people who try for them are kicked out. There's also a bunch of state-run loan cancellation programs, but I have only met a handful of people who have actually been able to get those state programs to work. I mean, I'm really sorry to say, but the only way these loans are going to go away is by the president literally doing an executive order, just wiping them away. We cannot count on the Department of Education or even the state governments, I would say, to actually make any of the loan forgiveness programs that are in existence actually work. We're talking about something that's much more severe, guys. I mean, I know people, lending systems fail from time to time. It just happens. And this is what we are living through with this federal student loan system. There's no forms to fill out. There's no person to call. This is the Wild West, guys. This is something we've never before seen in this country, certainly for student loans. But again, don't freak out too bad. I mean, at the end of World War II, like most monetary systems, certainly in Central, Western, Eastern Europe, we're completely kaput. So we have seen worse, and we will pull through this. But if you're looking for the right website to go to or the right form to fill out, you're not going to find that. This lending system has catastrophically failed. This pandemic is the nail in the coffin. We are fighting for a clean death to this lending system, being just racked and wrecked and embittered and embattled, pissed off, unpatriotic people, which is the bad ending. We want these loans to be just wiped away to the benefit of the economy, to the benefit of the people, and I say to the national spirit and the national constitution.
Yeah, so Patricia added that that's like the major issue that's keeping them from purchasing a home, and that they've tried all the forgiveness loans, but as you mentioned, really, it's only the president that can, get this out of the way. There's
any number of predatory vultures on the internet that'll be like, yeah, we can help you with your student loans. We can get you $0 repayment. None of those people know anything. The fact of the matter is, whether Biden is willing to admit it or not, I've looked at the numbers. I've been following the numbers for 16 years now. And when it comes to a point where a guy like me, who very moderately was calling only for bankruptcy return for 15 years, when a guy like me is now all of a sudden saying, this lending system is toast. The lending system is toast. So I don't have any good advice to give. In my humble opinion, nobody should ever make another payment on their federal student loans. That's not only unwise, but it's unhelpful, and I would say it's unpatriotic. It only feeds the beast. This is a predatory lending system. It shouldn't be fed. It should be starved. In very conservative parlance, this lending system needs to be taken to the bath and drowned in the tub. I kid you not. And again, almost nobody is paying on their loans right now. Probably 95% of everybody is not paying on their loans. And if and when this pandemic repayment suspension is lifted, almost nobody is going to resume paying. I mean, that's just the reality. So, I wish I had a website that I could give you. If I had a form that I would fill it out myself and I wouldn't be here, but that's not where we're at. The reality is, don't look for people claiming they can help you. Don't listen to them. They are charlatans. They're not looking out for your interests.
So we're nearing the end of our time. It's 8:02 now. Tina's on staff, so I'm going to go to her.
I just wanted to say for people to sign Alan's petition, join Student Loan Justice, and don't listen to Biden when he says that he cannot do this, because Alan has researched this. He knows it's the case. There's also a provision that people don't know called Compromise and Settlement Authority that's in the Department of Education, and they could opt out right now of collecting student debt. They have that in the Department of Education. So I've been seeing in the news where they're passing the buck, saying they don't think they can do it. The Department of Education says they can't do it. And Biden is trying to pass the buck to Congress. And why is that bad, Alan?
Well, Congress can never actually cancel loans. In order for Congress to cancel loans, they have to raise $1 for every dollar in loans that they want to cancel. So there's no way on God's green earth here today or in the foreseeable future that Congress is ever going to pass a law that somehow raises $1.8 trillion to cancel student loans. It's just not going to happen. It will never happen. And even if they did, it would wind up being much like any of the other forgiveness programs that we've already seen. Public service loan forgiveness, income-based repayment, income-driven repayment. There's millions of people who since the 90s have tried for these various forgiveness programs. And of all the millions of people who have tried for these since the 90s, 32 people, like enough people to fit in my living room, have actually gotten their loans forgiven. So it's just not even worth pursuing or even talking about. And Biden trying to defer to Congress is just a chump move. But, like I said, Biden's rhetoric has changed 180 degrees since 1 year ago. It will change hugely in the next 6 to 8 months, I'm sure. Hopefully it changes in a good way. I think it will. But, we're going to need all your all's help. It's going to take parties like the Green Party who tell the truth rather than play little political, stupid, fake language games. That's the one thing I really love about everybody I've ever met from the Green Party is they tell the truth as best as they can determine it to be. There's no hidden agendas or anything, any of that nonsense that we see with these silver-tongued politicians on both the Democratic and Republican side. That's what we need. We need truth tellers right now. And so don't be fooled by the nonsense you hear out of Biden's mouth.
Hear, hear. And I just want to say, go to Student Loan Justice because Alan has lists of media for each state that you can go and send their statements. They have press statements for you to send out that explain all of this. Pressure the media to cover this. Call your governors and representatives, and also push Biden on social media and by sending in letters and all of that. I had one politician tell me one time that they don't pay attention unless people contact them, and they hardly ever get anybody to contact them, which is ridiculous. Which is ridiculous. They should be doing what's right. For the
seriously. If even a couple hundred people call a governor's office in one day, that's enough to get the whole office abuzz. They're like, wow, what's going on? So, who's it? It's Ralph Northam, right? If Ralph Northam was to get 500 Twitters and 500 phone calls in one day about the fact that Virginians owe more than the entire Virginia state budget in student loan debt, they'd be like, whoa. Or if they got put on the hot spot by the local Virginia media, that would force them to confront this problem. And I have to say, I'm feeling a lot better about the governors than I do about Joe Biden right now. So all politics is local, as they say.
That is right. Local up, grassroots up. That is exactly right. Well, it's it's about that time. I think we're a little bit over. Alan, we could talk to you for a very long time. We hope maybe you can come back and you know, visit with us again, because I'm sure as more people become aware that Biden's not going to do this in the first 100 days, they're going to want to help out. So thank you a million for being here with us today. Do you want to, Blazin, you want to read what Diana said on the way out, because it's very nice?
Yeah, so Diana, she said many great things. She's happy to hear you say, you know, feeling guilty for getting that degree, or, you know, and glad that they didn't make a move on any of those predatory loan forgiveness programs, and that they found out about both the Green Party and you, that they've been sharing your work for months now on nearly a weekly basis, and just really much thanks to you and the Tina and to the Green Party, and much love.
Well, that's great to hear. And thank you, by the way. I would love to come back anytime. This issue is changing really fast. It's going to be in a far different place even 6 months from now. So yeah, well, let's definitely keep in touch and see what we can get going here in Virginia and nationally.
That's great. And this has been recorded, so it will be posted on our social media. Please share and sign Alan's petitions, contact the media, contact Biden and all your representatives. And let's get these student loans canceled. Thanks, everybody.